Welcome to the Audiation in the Wild podcast with your hosts, Beau Taillefer and Eric Rasmussen.
So, Eric, you want to talk about movement?
I want to explode. I, I, I don't know what hit me this week. It was this little boy. He's not 1 year old yet. It's like 9 months, maybe younger. I think he's younger. He's sitting up, and I play stuff for him, and he goes, "Yeah!" Like making his biceps, and his fists. It's like it's the funniest thing. He goes, "Yeah!" And he just in his little boy voice. It's hilarious. And so, of course, I do it back, right? And he looks at me like, nobody's done that before. What are you doing that for? I said, because you're doing it. You're showing me something. It's like, yeah. And I just cracked up. And the family says, yeah, he does that all the time at home. This is mostly just for music, but he does it in other circumstances too. And I'm like, well, what is that movement? I haven't seen that in a kid quite like that before. You see him grunt and but this kid, like the whole upper body tenses up, and he's like he's showing off his pectorals or something.
It's like a bodybuilding pose.
Yeah, for like a second or two, he does this, and it's a build up too. It's like, yeah, and it just cracks me up. And I go like, let's take our cues from the children with this stuff. Like, what movement are they doing, right? All right, here's where I'm going to jump off a ledge for people. But I have a pair of shoes. 35 years of doing early childhood. That's a shitload of time. I never see a kid do what we do typically is wave our hands in the air for the typical, they call it,
continuous flow.
Continuous fluid movement is the CFM, right? That's the term. Continuous fluid movement. Now, there, to me, is nothing more fluid than this boy doing his thing. It's got fluid, but it's like mud, or like it's got a particular kind of resistance, right? It's bound flow. If you want to analyze it using Laban, and I don't know how much we've spoken about Laban. First of all, I got to say, it's a little bit shameful. I know it's been embedded in many of our conversations over the last, 74 episodes of this podcast. But there's not one of our episodes that's dedicated to movement. So I feel like, is this a symptom of something, or are we not regarding its importance by not having a special episode on movement only? So I just spread out a lot of fertile ground for the conversation, but it's like, take our cue from the kids. Having flow be in all your movements is wonderful, but I'd say, who would you rather be around? Like Duke Ellington Orchestra, watching all the intricacies of all the types of movement that aren't necessarily flow, but you're hearing music that's totally in flow like that, but you're not saying mod. Well, I take it back. It's like there's total flow in the individual people in the Duke Ellington Orchestra, right? Of course, you would think, or most of them, or some of them would be great, but would you rather have that, or would you rather have the Gordon CFM that gets modeled so much over just about every meter, every style, every tonality, every piece of music is like, you should move this way for the children. And it's like, well, where did you get this? Well, it's continuous fluid movement and supposed to represent flow. And we want the kids to see that as a model. But what else should they be modeling? What else can we be doing with our bodies with movement that goes beyond that? I mean, why is that
Mhm.
the one thing that we focus on so much? I'm I'm curious if there's other people that would think that that's insufficient to be the thing that's modeled so thoroughly and consistently and pervasively across all styles, which we talked about in earlier days, are lacking in terms of the number of styles that is in the typical MLT curriculum. There is some blues, there is some boogie in Marilyn Whitelow's, curriculum and swing here and there, but there's just not enough of that, and not enough uh, Latin or other types of styles that we should be modeling for these kids with the movement that would be appropriate for that, not just the waving of the arms from side to side uh, without. And there are some that do this. I don't want to say everybody does this, but there are some people who really encompass their bodies inside the music rather than it seems like it's ancillary or something.
Totally. Yeah, because I mean, eventually these movements they become like the kinesthetic linking of what you're audiating in terms of rhythm, and even linked to the style, like you were saying, the way, like I'm feeling like when I play Latin stuff and I feel these accents happening, on the tas, for example, if
Yeah.
you're in duple, I feel those as jabs in the air, right? Like I feel those as sharp, like jabs in terms of
Yeah.
movement. And I think, I see this like the continuous fluid movement is a good counterpart to the type of movement that's normally taught in music instruction, which is this like accenting the macro beat with a lot
Yeah,
of
beat
weight, like it's a
keeping. It's
hammer.
like the anti-beat keeping thing, which
Yeah,
is
exactly. So
perfect. And but why can't you encompass both? I
yeah,
mean,
exactly. And so I see it as like, just like we need to hear different meters and tonalities and different chord progressions within a tonality to be able to discriminate many different things within the realm of movement. You need many different types of movement. Like, and Eric and I were talking about this off air, but yeah, I think that continuous movement or that continuous flow is good to have in there, but it's one of many types of movement. The way you feel the weight, the way you feel the flow,
yeah,
the way you feel the space of the movement in the room. Like, because feeling a macro beat that's small kinesthetically, even with a lot of weight, like a
yeah,
dense macro
yeah,
beat with a lot of weight, is different than feeling a macro beat with a lot of weight that moves like through space differently. And I'm not even talking about tempo at all. I'm just talking about the way that you feel the space and the weight of things.
exactly. Weight and flow are the real expressive elements inside of movement. And then there's the time and the space, right? And the time can be considered not in the way that Laban felt it or meant it. Um, you know, time we translate into, beats and, micro beats and divisions or elongations or what have you,
Mm.
which is a good coding system for what we're talking about. Those terms fit really well. We talk about tempo and divisions or augmentations of the beat, but um, why limit ourselves? So I'm just saying incorporate, or what I'd like to say is incorporate this fluid movement while you're also showing, strong weight. There's a song my kids want consistently. Kabalevsky, uh, uh, what is it? Something of the comedian, pantomime of the
Hmm.
comedian. This strong, yum, bum, bum. There's all kinds of room for the flow in between these heavy dinosaur steps, and why not do these dinosaur steps with like lots of weight, throwing yourself into the ground, and the kids get animated by it and they move their bodies and they're in some sort of flow too, even if they're not on the beat and they tend to stamp their feet instead of be heavy.
Hmm.
and I can get them to move their bodies differently, like throw your shoulders into your ankles.
Hmm.
Or, for the older kids, I'll say that. For younger kids, I'll say you got to dig in the garden, but it's made of rocks. So you got to really like stamping on it's not going to do it. You got to
That's why accenting things,
flow
like
your
trying to
body.
accent things, like in terms of volume, it doesn't make people feel weight. Some people, when they accent it, they intuitively understand that there should be a weight added to that feeling. Like in terms of if you're trying
Yeah.
to accent macro beats to give a sense of weight,
Yeah.
that doesn't necessarily do it.
Well, there's staccato and sforzando and a lot of variations in between or beyond, tenutos and right.
Mm-hmm.
There's like different amounts of weight, right?
Mm-hmm.
Staccato's a kind of weight, isn't it? Separating it, it gives it a sense of weight. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
uh, Marcato, another one, right? All these things, but they're terms that help us like try to differentiate, but isn't it on a continuum somewhere? And isn't it not different in jazz than it is in rock and classical and, early music versus, you know, contemporary? There's this huge continuum. And how do you represent that, beyond what you can put on the page? Uh,
Oh, that's
you've got,
exactly what I was just thinking. Because sometimes at the start of a piece, you might see it just labeled, lightly. And that's not a description of the necessarily only, how loud to play or whatever with a light touch. It's a description of the kinesthetic like arena that you should be operating in, what kind of weight the beat has. It's a light beat. So, and that's separate from the tempo of the piece, completely separate. Because you
yeah,
could have a light feeling at a slow tempo or a light feeling at a blazing tempo. It's a different thing. But
yeah,
there's not really a universal way to talk about that other than just these kind of vague pointers that composers will give. Or that's
yeah,
why being around somebody like Garrett gave the example of like being with the Duke Ellington Orchestra or with Duke himself, you can see the way their body interacts with the music, and it's something that is left out of a lot of instruction for sure.
yeah. I just get a little bit crazy when it's so overemphasized, the fluid movement piece, that I'm not putting down. I'm just saying it's just insufficient relative to all the other kinds of movement that we should be modeling for our kids. Now, clicking sticks,
Yeah.
you know, yeah, every once in a while I click sticks, for mostly the older kids. I definitely don't do this with the toddlers and 3, 4 year olds. Not as much the clicking. I'm drawing. If I use sticks, I'm drawing circles on the ground and putting different weight like that, or going up in the air with the sticks. And the sticks are there to be clicked, but I definitely roll them and all these other things in addition to the discrete movement that clicks lend themselves to. It's like keeping the beat or clicking on the beat and all that. And at 3 and 4 year old, uh, they just love using the sticks. So I'm playing great music. We're using the sticks. Yes, I'm doing discrete movement, which is a little bit antithetical to the movement that we're trying to emphasize. But I'm doing so many other things with the sticks at that level. But that's where I cross the line into, like I understand why not teach. You don't teach the beat by teaching the beat. You know what I mean? Like,
Mhm.
we got to keep the beat, guys. Here it is. No, I
Well,
teach the
and
beat by feel of the flow, weight of the
mhm.
phrase, the the form, ultimately, like that kind of beat. And then it eventually gets down to, can you chant patterns with macro and micro beats in them, and then beyond that with pickups and
Yep.
elongations, divisions, and that. So I do get the kids, ba da ba, ba da ba, ba da ba 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 ba. Ba da ba, yeah, ba ba ba. I do that stuff like with crazy dynamics and over accentuated style, because what you get back is just a little bit of that. Kids, you could
Mm,
scream to high heaven and tell them to scream the song, and they finally sing at a mezzo forte level. You know,
exactly. Yeah.
come on, kids, I can't hear you. They're 5, they're 6, they're 4, whatever, and I don't hear them. They're all singing, but he can't hear them over the.
Oh, it's funny the way that works with vocals, because on the guitar it's the opposite. Everyone plays forte on the guitar at all times. Very few people understand, like, in terms of the range of how quiet you can get. The acoustic guitar, where your fingers, even with a pick though, but with your fingers right on the guitar, that thing can get quiet, and people don't really explore.
And that's all associated with the movement of your fingers or the movement of your breath when you're singing. Or you should breathe too, right? As a guitar player, don't you breathe? Isn't that part of your movement vocabulary?
I've always been called out by guitar players that I play with and musicians. They're like, why do you breathe along with the music? Because the first instrument I played was the sax, and I always breathe before I play a phrase on the guitar. Or if I'm playing something really rhythmical, my breath will like breathe on the offbeats or something. And I'm not consciously doing this. It just quite frankly feels better to have my breath as part of the movement of the music. And
I stopped doing 1, 2, ready, go. Ever. I don't think I ever do it anymore. I just breathe and play, and the kids get used to it. Mm-hmm. There's occasional time where, you're performing and you got to get the kids to start at a specific spot. That's like, okay, look at me. Everybody, eyes on, got to get at least 80-90% of the kids to look at you before you start. It's like, by then you don't really need to say ready, go. You just breathe, and they know the song. They know the tempo of the song. They've done it, by that time, 30, 40 times or whatever, to do something, to present. You want them to start on time. I don't necessarily care if the kids come in on the second word or the second measure when I'm in class. They just catch up. I'm not interested in getting 3 and 4-year-olds to start perfectly. I just want them to sing and learn their patterns and like that. Sure. And when it comes to patterns, I model the breath. I don't ever really tell them, because then they start concentrating on something that's almost second nature to them. If they're ready to sing, they're going to breathe.
Yeah, which is what we do when we talk. We don't consciously plan when to breathe. We naturally take a gulp of air before we start a sentence, and our brain seems to know how much.
And it knows how much before you say the sentence. It knows how much air you're going to need, so you don't run out of the air that they get.
It's pretty wild that that's possible. Yeah, it's cool. I think in terms of this, it's always good to bring this movement discussion back to, the whole point of what Gordon taught. And for me, Engelman is in there too. It's like learning something is about making discriminations, and the more variation you can make in terms of the type of movement you're doing and mixing those up so people can see the comparisons, like doing something really heavy and thick next to the same physical movement with the body but with a light touch, or like adding, and you can really play with this, right? You can do like a verse that's heavy, and then the second half of the verse is like flowing, and then back to heavy, and those discriminations get easier to make, and with different body parts, and with like, it gets fun. Like you can sway it heavy with the macro beat and do the continuous movement with your hands, and you learn how to have these like multiple types of weight and flow going on at the same time. And that's why I think gives rise to, eventually that's translated when you're playing, things on the guitar or the piano with 2 voices. You can feel one voice as being heavy and one voice as being light and flowing, because you have this like kinesthetic analogy to kind of plan to go along with it. And Eric, this is what I see, because I'm an instrumental teacher, like in terms of my one-on-one teaching, this is left out instrumentally, probably even more than what you see, right? Because people show up for piano lessons and they just want to play the right notes. They're not thinking like they basically need to be dancing while they're playing the friggin' instrument. And I've had loads of fun with like, I'll teach teenagers sometimes that have a background in dance. Yeah. And they're like the best to teach, man. They're so fun to teach because they totally understand all of this movement stuff. You don't have to convince them and go through all this stuff with them. They just do it naturally. And I mean, one thing I was talking to Eric about is like, one of the problems I see with instrumental music is that the pieces that are being learned are so technically challenging that people can't even pull them off. And if you can't play them, you can't experiment with different kinds of movement. So I would much rather see a student, I'm not saying you should never have technically challenging pieces by any means, but if you have a bulk of repertoire that's physically playable and audiatable, what you can do is you can start exploring different kinds of movement. So I don't mean playing the piece in different meters or in different tempos. I mean playing the piece where you feel a weight on one part of the macro beat, and then you feel something light instead. And that's such valuable practice in the sense of that's to me a huge part of what style is. I mean, style is very deep. It's all these customs of weight and movement and rhythmic patterns and harmonic progression. Style is like all of that makes up a style, but just changing the weight and flow of and the movement patterns of how you're audioing the piece at a movement level, it can be such entertaining practice and so enjoyable. And practice isn't always about like learning more patterns and memorizing more. Sometimes it's just you spend 20 minutes with a piece and play it over and over again with different feels of movement. And oh my God. And you can hear this in like famous piano players, like, re-record pieces. This is one of the reasons I love Glenn Gould's recording of Turkish March. It's so off from the way people normally play it. He plays it with this really like punchy staccato like vibe at a slow tempo. Dun, 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 dun.
Yeah.
Dun, 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 dun. And it's so different than the way people are normally conceptualizing the piece, like at a kinesthetic level. And man, that's the cash money.
Yeah,
that stuff.
Well, one of the pieces I use for my kids to vary, movement is I love this piece, and the kids do too. Is the Russian sailors dance.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got a Eugene Ormandy recording, and the strings are just ridiculous on this, but it's got the big fat introduction, and then it's like what I do is I do big elephant, and then the baby elephant comes right after that,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then there's like a tiger, and then there's a butterfly. And then it's the dinosaur after that. And then we march. And then it's the butterfly again.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's 1,000 mice. And then hummingbird. And then bees. So now we're into the frenzy part, right? And it's like, and then at the end, you've got the ending part. I started introducing the crocodile where the crocodile eats all the animals at the end. Jump, da 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 jump, da 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 jump, 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 bah! It's just big bite. Yeah. And so you've got the butterfly twice. You've got the marching. You've got the lion versus the elephant versus the baby elephant. And they have to explore with their bodies what that really means. And at 2-3 years old, they, estimate what that's like. And it gives them a vocabulary that they just love to move to. Why is that? Why is that at any point wrong?
Well, and it's so important because just learning to copy rhythm patterns, like at an oral level, is not going to solve these kinds of problems of movement. You can I have students who, within a short time, I've taught a lot of rhythm patterns to, and they get the meter, and I can say, is this duple or triple? And, we've done lots of that, and they can do that. But it takes people more time to develop this more keen physical awareness, this kinesthetic awareness, if they haven't explored it very much.
Yeah. I don't know. I just don't get the overemphasis of the continuous fluid movement, because I can do continuous fluid movement, and inside of this, and it's not always the thing you're going to say is the predominant thing that's happening, but it's in there. And you can do that with so much other, and represent meter and beat and both. Like when I'm running to Hall of the Mountain King, which I burned I burned a hole in that final uh, over the last couple of weeks. When we're when we're really moving at the end, I'm doing right hand in the air, left hand in the air, left, right. So they're moving to meter. If I've got their feet relatively close, I'm or emphasizing half notes or quarter notes or whatever I'm doing. Uh,
Hmm.
in addition to what's being kept steady in the feet, uh, and the kids, whether they're with the beat or not, they're starting to coordinate their bodies if they're indeed trying to copy me. Um, Mostly I do that kind of meter teaching in the body with kids that are coordinated enough to do it. I have a 3-year-old who can do this on her knees and goes ba da 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 ba da dee ba ba da dee ba ba da dee ba when she wants to. The point, it's like you don't always catch her in the mood where she's not being a diva because she's a little bit like that, this little kid. And I love her. In fact, I found her dad at the daycare and I said, this girl's ridiculous coordination. And, I'm really looking forward. And, well, we're not going to be in that daycare next year. Like, come to Peabody. And so she's in my class. And what she does coordination wise is silly. And instead of dad, mom brought her yesterday. And I said to her mom, I go up to her after class and I said, don't worry about the behavior stuff. That's what a 3-year-old does. Don't like, she's great. And I need to tell you about her rhythmic coordination is absolutely ridiculous for someone that's 3. And I said, it tells me that you were doing something movement wise or musically wise. You were doing something musical while she was in utero. I can tell you flat out right now. And she says, oh, yeah. She says, I was here at Peabody doing the ballet as an adult all the way through my pregnancy. Mm-hmm. I just went, I told you, it's like, I didn't say that. I just kind of shrugged my shoulders and said, that's, I know. It's like, that's every parent I talk to that has a kid that's a little bit off the scale, like above the 90th percentile or 95th or wherever she is. I don't know how to measure that without doing a study.
Apparently that's what my mom was doing.
Dollars.
My mom was doing all those kind of, musical in utero exposure things, and then I was in musical preschools and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. Nothing like, there was no MLT teacher guiding any of it, but as the whole point of this podcast is there's stuff people are doing that works. That's
yeah, just dance when you're pregnant. I've never been wrong, and the places that I have been wrong, quote unquote, or been told no, we didn't do much, and I really have a long interview with the parent. This was when I was doing my dissertation research. I found out it was a cultural difference. Like, parents don't brag about what they've done for their children. There was certain families that wrote down on the paper that they didn't do much of anything. But when you ask them, yeah, they went, church 2 or 3 times a week. They went to, they had all this rich stuff going on that they didn't consider as important for their child's development as much as it really truly deserved.
And this is where we get into the travesty with music education and movement, is that, let's say you have someone at like an elementary school, a principal who's really serious about the subjects being academically kind of souped up, and they're like, okay, I want this music program in the school to be like the best of the best, and I want these kids really like supercharged. And then they walk into a class of an MLT teacher doing this like expressive movement stuff, and it looks very like non-goal directed and very like exploratory and not kind of regimented. And it's so easy for someone in that situation who doesn't understand this stuff to be like, well, those are just a waste of time. Those activities, they're not amounting to anything. And it sucks because those are probably the most important skills that you'll gain rhythmically. And it doesn't even it's not even penned into rhythm. I mean, you see this problem with people who are improvising where they have all this harmonic knowledge and they even know rhythm patterns, but the solos don't make any sense. It's because they're not feeling the style and the kinesthetic kind of weight of the phrases that they're playing. And that's another, that's a whole nother topic, of just the way people think of solos. Sometimes it can be so intellectual in the sense they're just thinking of tones that are appropriate to play over this tonality, but they're not thinking of gestures as sentences. And it's like bop bop da do da do da do da 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 da. Each one of those had its own kinesthetic pulse that went with it. The staccatos and the longer phrases I felt as flow, and then back to the punching. And that's how I'm thinking of that improv as a series of gestures, not even rhythm patterns. I'm not even thinking of the rhythm patterns. Each pattern is more like a kinesthetic word almost. And it's such a more enjoyable level to sit at while you're improvising rather than like, does this tone work over this function? And does that work over this? And you need to know all that at some intuitive level. But when your improv is guided by this almost like instinctual kinesthetic pulse, all that other stuff just falls into place. Like it just perfectly locks in, it's amazing. And you don't really know what that's like until you play with a musician that steamrolls you like that. When you play with someone they're playing things that you couldn't play if you were trying as hard as you could, and they're fucking around. And that's when if you have this experience, I call it the freight train experience, where you play with a jazz musician that just runs you over like a freight train. Whoever it is, it doesn't even have to be like someone on Oscar Peterson's level. It can just be someone that can audiate well. And you experience this. You're like, wow, whatever I'm doing is not working. And what they're doing but the problem is a lot of these musicians can't actually, because they don't have this pedagogical framework to put it in, they can't tell you that what they're doing is a kinesthetic thing. And to get where they are, it's not necessarily about learning more harmonic stuff, more harmonic patterns, more scales, more crazy technical stuff on your instrument. There's an underlying skill set that a lot of people are missing. In that, in that kind of situation.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was watching a thing of Bernstein, talking about, he's like conducting this youth orchestra and they're playing like the Rite of Spring. And there's a part where he's like, these big kind of huge pulses that are underneath everything. He's like, I don't know what you picture here, like dinosaurs or something, but that's another really important point about this kinesthetic thing. And that you mentioned earlier with these songs is that it's often metaphorical. The way you feel the weight, you're imagining some kind of animal or situation that encompasses and reflects that. And that's another part of this that's so easy to think like, well, that's just like fun stuff for kids. That's nonsense. But that's how adult musicians conceptualize their own music in terms of weight and metaphor. And it's not this like technical thing that people think it is. Yeah. It's very abstract, and that's what makes it an art form. In large part. Yeah. It's
just so accessible to kids because they know animals almost more than they know their colors.
You could even think like, I'm imagining an orchestra, a piece that's about like a machine, like a factory, and all the different sounds that could come. Like there's like this hard pulse, and then maybe this smaller machine that's like buzzing around and doing these little tiny things. And even just something simple like that, you can see how the metaphors start taking off.
It's all an act of imagination, right? And that it lives in the domain of what imagination and audiation at the same time. So imagination, obviously, image, right? And it's distinct from audiation, but can not be combined there. You're audiating weight. That can come through imagination, and it can come through audiation.
And they get kinesthetically linked at some point.
Yes, yeah. Right? It's your hind brain that is ruling the show, and and midbrain, hindbrain, midbrain stuff.
This is why for me Stravinsky is just head and shoulders above anyone that tries to imitate him, because like when I'm listening to Stravinsky, it's almost like there's a complete injection of some kind of image in audiated form, but like there's a whole story in like a melody in terms of its weight and its metaphor. And it's almost like his so much of his music, it almost felt like it was like an entity that is like created in your mind, like some kind of character or being. And it's insane. I mean, I'm not like I've never experienced that to that level. Maybe save like Debussy or something like that, or some of the other Russian composers like Rimsky. But Stravinsky just had this thing. It just dialed in.
Yeah. Well, his orchestration and everything just is beyond compared to me in terms of what I've listened to over the years. But yeah, no, you gotta feel music, and how you feel it is through movement and first, and these other things sit above it. You know, even harmony.
Mm.
You know, there's all these contexts inside which we have to juggle our audiation around, and you know the fact that we don't move our bodies in as many ways as we possibly can, to me, is a problem. If that is indeed the case, and I don't go to everybody's rooms to watch them, but I do see some of our master teachers and the teachers who teach those teachers, and you know, and I got a sense of what that is, and I just hope that there's places to expand on what we're already doing that's so great, and making it even more expressive for our kids. Because that's what I just die for, is the kids to be expressive, you know. And they love it. They love when I fake cry. They think that's the funniest thing. You know, why is my belly sore? Why I ate too much candy at Halloween, right? It's just one of my chants. It goes 7-8-2-4-7-8. And at the end, like, why is my belly sore? Why is my belly sore? And they just like that expression. It's like, so they want to imitate that in their voices. So they're given different kinds of intonation on a chant, you know, that expresses that, you know, fake. And I think that gives them access to, like, when they do really express something that's upsetting, right? And they're moaning about something that they've done moaning in a pretend setting versus moaning when they really do have a stomach ache or whatever, right? So they can like go, oh, that's part of a song, you know, like that's the same thing, except the context is different. It's for fun versus something that's really painful.
Yeah, I mean the expression part is such a good point, and I find it, again, because I'm teaching instrumentally. I find when you're talking about phrasing with people, it's way more efficient to be metaphorical than literal. You know, you can say like, okay, we're going to play the first two notes staccato, then the next note's, you know, not staccato, but I almost would prefer like, you know, punch the first two notes, like something metaphorical, something,
Yeah.
and then you know next time feel this whole phrase like someone's skipping, like it's light, and those, I think, those descriptions of phrasing, when they're properly online, they're so much more practical in terms of communicating to people what you're looking for.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. I think I got a percent of my, I don't know, I got really jacked up about this in my mind a couple of days ago.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why not? I think I was working with another teacher, like, and this is so.
Probably my favorite insight that consistently happens once I work with people, especially if they're already in like concert band at school, is once we do enough movement and rhythm patterns and, you know, discrimination of meters, people always come back and report, I don't like the way my band teacher conducts 3/4. I don't like it. It feels wrong. Not like it's mathematically wrong. They understand doo-da-dee and where the macro, but they're like, it feels wrong to put a macro beat on every beat. Like they want to feel it as micro beats, and they feel that flow differently.
Yeah.
And it just drives people crazy.
Yeah. My daughter did her band concert. This was back when she was in high school. Now she's out of college. Time is flying. Oh. And so we're watching the choral. She came out to the audience and sat with me, and we're watching the choral director. And the choral director goes, a bounce one, and then 2 is about 2 yards to her right. 1. Oops, I just crashed the mic. So I had to spatial awareness. Not this time in the morning yet. But anyway, just 1, 2, 3. And it's like, why? What? And she looks at me and it's like, Dad, just, Dad,
this isn't cool.
This is weird.
Mm-hmm.
Because she knows I'm critical of these things. Because we have talks, at every band concert, I usually, her mom and I would come back separately, and she'd always go with me. Because she knew I would go, and talk about what I heard musically, and and I would say the good stuff, and I ask her what she thought, and she'd usually nail it.
Yeah. Yeah, fair enough. One other thing we didn't talk about that I wanted to mention is like when I'm watching students play instrumentally, which is usually like a couple drum students, piano students, and guitar students. I noticed this. I was working with a drummer recently. They were just doing this drum beat that was like just a simple drum beat, kick, hi-hat, snare, hi-hat. And I noticed once people are audiating not only the meter, but feeling the movement properly, they wind up for the snare and you can see the continuous movement. So if it's like, their whole hand, like there's insane preparation, like a whole bar before, you feel that you can see the snare winding up in the air. And that's such a good way to tell if someone's instrumentally audiating, like in terms of, and it's linked to the breath. It's like the breath can be shoved in as a preparatory thing, but body movements happen. And same thing when guitarists strum, they'll wind up their certain, anyways, it's just something interesting to watch for.
Yeah. I part of this bubbling up for me this week strongly is the fact that I had a 2.5 to 3-year-old class, and at the end of this 5/8 chant, it goes to 6. And then there's season. Let me just do it. Seasons are changing. Down come the... No, it's not that one. Anyway, at the end, it goes to 6 after this 5/8. Well, it's actually 5/4. It's really slow 5. It might have come from... I just sang the same rhythm as the melody in Candide. Right? Wow. I didn't realize that. I totally copped that rhythm off of Bernstein. But at the end, and jump in the leaves, and jump, if you please, and jump in the leaves, and jump, if you please. And the kids all landed on the word jump. Mm-hmm. You land on the word jump. You don't prepare.
That's exactly what I'm talking about.
And jump on jump. You land on jump. Yeah, that's what triggered this memory. And 2.5, 3, everybody, bam. And I did the song 2 or 3 times, and not everybody every time, but I got everybody a couple times. And
that's exactly why I recommend music that is less technically demanding than you think your students can handle, because you need to leave some brain power, some just ability to work on these things. Because if you're having students do stuff like that on pieces they're playing instrumentally, that'll scale up to being a world-class professional musician. But if you have people playing pieces that they can't even technically handle, there's no way the meter or the movements online, that doesn't scale anywhere. That's just confusion and chaos that doesn't actually scale. And it's so important to just start with authentic little units of repertoire and patterns that are properly audiated in terms of the movement.
And why is it, to me, this, and, right? It's actually,
yeah.
But, instead of and jump, it's and jump. Like a dot.
That's the joke of syncopation. It's these jabs that are off from the macro beat.
And I think that's helpful in the preparation for this versus just having your normal and jump. Gives you longer to get ready, I suppose. But it's also not your typical rhythm that we teach. But, there needs to be more of all this, I think. But all right, I've said my piece.
Yeah, and for for instrumentalists and all that kind of stuff, I highly recommend, fire up a practice session where you just work on this stuff with pieces you already can play. Just work on different movements. Put the macro beat. And this is such an interesting way. I mean, people are generally not a fan of the metronome because what do people do when there's a metronome? They just put it on the beat and turn off the brain. But like actually MLT kind of approved ways to work with a metronome. Put the metronome on the micro beat. Put the metronome on the macro beat. Feel a weight to the left of you every time there's a macro beat. Feel the weight to the right of you. You can play with these different things. Make the metronome the first beat of every 4 bars and feel a weight, and those are the games you play where
the other thing,
it's fun stuff.
I gave up on metronome for a while when I was studying, this is back in my 20s or whatever. And I took jazz piano lessons for just a few times for a friend. It was a way for me to give him money here and there. But he said, I use a metronome all the time. Just put it on 4/4, right? But only have it click on 2 and 4.
Exactly.
And if you don't have a metronome that knows you can program to click 2 or 4, just put it on and use it like 2, 4.
Put the metronome on day in duple.
Yes, exactly.
Put the metronome on every other day in duple. Yeah. Those are the, like when I actually once in a while parents email me.
Don't let me
yeah, go ahead.
So I saw an interview of Steve Gadd. So Steve Gadd is quintessential, just my favorite drummer on so much stuff. He's just insane. Steely Dan, the Asia album. Mm-hmm. And he was in this interview, he was talking about what he was doing just recently. This was, COVID time during the plague. He goes, so I was playing that solo, but I put the metronome, or I was playing it one beat after. He says these are the same exact technical skills as I'm using for this solo, but now I'm starting on beat 2. Or the end of 1 or something, right? And he says, it totally changed everything I was doing in my mind when everything I was playing in my hands was exactly the same technique. And it just like scrambled his brain, he said, kind of like I had to readjust musically to something I'd been playing effortlessly for. He says, all of a sudden, the same things got, hard again. Like I had to learn it. And he says, I had to practice that to get till he said comfortable with it. And for him, comfortable means,
like complete mastery.
Absolute complete God.
Well, this is such a great example of how audiation is something that has to be learned separate from technique. Because clearly, he had the technique; he could play it when it was at a certain part of the beat, but shift everything over an eighth note or a micro beat. And
you just find that so fascinating. Come from that guy, it's like that's what he's learning. He's learning something.
Yeah. No, I think that's really cool. I was gonna say before, like once in a while, I get a parent emailing me, especially kids that are doing exams for piano and stuff. They're like, "Should my kid use the metronome?" Like, not till I've shown them how.
Yes.
Because if they're playing with the metronome on every beat, I'd rather have them not use it. But if they're going to do stuff like putting on 2 and 4 and 1 and 3 and only 1 and on the ands and on the
or
E's,
if there's a technical thing, it can be helpful to start at 70 and ratchet it up to 82 or something like that to get your fingers grooving.
It gives you an objective sense of what speed you can execute something at. Yeah. And that's valid. Yeah. To keep tabs on, well, I can play this at 120, but not 130.
Yeah, and it really needs to be at 132, and then that's fine. It's a tool that way. But it can also be it turns into your enemy if you can't do it.
Totally. An unreal practice technique, by the way, we've talked about this before, but take a piece and play it 1 bar at a time and put a bar of space in the middle, but don't stop feeling the meter and the movement And holy smokes, that'll sort you out in the sense,
Yeah.
because if you can keep the piece alive like that, it's almost just a joke once you start doing 2 bars at a time with 2 bars of space, and you grow this sense of
Yeah, we should talk about tools for practice like that, tuning, and metronomes and underlying, like using a drum kit or recording doing some MIDI.
Oh my God!
But we'll do it another time.
just as a teaser, using drum beats to practice classical pieces is so fun. Like put a Latin beat on, like just YouTube a Latin like drum backing track and play Bach pieces with syncopated accents over that. It's so fun, man. It's a blast. Yeah. But in terms of practice techniques that's related to this, you can set up goals for yourself. Like, okay, I'm going to play this piece on the piano and I'm going to feel the macro beats as a left and right sway while I play the piece, and then try not doing that. And then, those are really good uses of time.
All right.
Okay. Till next time.
Later.